Of course, whenever things are traumatic enough, our minds have a big knack for suppressing these memories. You really don't take that factor into consideration about how much of like a mental, physical, and emotional toll it takes on you after a while. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're inept in handling your own situation. It just means that you're not equipped, or your brain or mind tells you that you're not equipped. So guess what? We're going to suppress it by putting it in the shelf, putting it behind the door, locked away a little bit. We go through the proper channels in order to deal with those situations. Then we could go ahead and unlock that door and deal with it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Win the Night podcast. I'm back with Joel. We're here for part 2 of the multi-series episodes we're having with our guests, where we follow them from childhood all the way up to where they are today. If you missed part 1, definitely go check that out first, where you'll kind of get to see what Joel's upbringing was like, and leading up to where we are here in part 2. So Joel, thank you for checking back in with us.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. Last time we talked about a handful of things. We talked about your adolescence, you going into football. And so what my question is, as we left off around there, was where you were kind of like, you wanted to be a part of it, but, you didn't know if you fit in, and you mentioned bullying and all that stuff. How did that influence you then into nursing, and what interested you in that, what led you down that path?
So I've always been good at the biological sciences. I found a fascination in nature in general, and it also helped that stereotypically I'm Filipino, so obviously had a lot of nurses as well as medical professionals such as doctors in the family. My mom was a lab tech who was aspiring to be a nurse, but unfortunately life happened. Her father, my grandfather, ended up having a stroke, and that really put a damper on her nursing aspirations as she was in school, and she never got around to finishing it, because I think just kind of the death of her father kind of took its toll on her, and she opted not to go back. But she was the lab tech as well, and of course stereotypically, we're taught as Filipinos that in order to make good on living your best life and just being happy is, get a degree under your belt first and foremost, right. Preferably nursing. And the rationale behind the whole nursing deal was because people will always be getting sick. You'll always be in demand. And they also put the gender twist into it too. Like, oh yeah, you're a guy, in a female-dominated profession, you do really good. And, fast forward to my nursing career now, 30 years down the road, that's not always the case. And of course, they wanted to drive home too that, the more degrees that you have under your belt, the better that you'll do, the happier you'll be, the more money you'll make. And unfortunately, that wasn't true as well. So there's a lot of, preconceived notions that comes around with going into the medical field. Yeah. In general, it's very, very high prestige, and it's very, very respectable. But going along with what we're talking about with, ADHD and everything, it's probably not the best thing for people that are givers to give unconditional emotion and mental aspect to it, because in order to be a caregiver, you do have to be sacrificial to a certain point, right? There has to be a part of you that likes taking care of people, or taking care of things, or just having a general interest in just life and being able to preserve it. And rewind to my nursing career and everything, I figured out that being a caregiver is probably something inherent in me, and it's something that I really, really like doing. And since I am very, very good at the sciences and took a fascination in the human body as well as psychology in general, I'm my first thing was, maybe I could become a psych nurse or something. I'll just go ahead and give this whole nursing thing a try, and we'll see what happens.
So let me ask you then, you mentioned, we've been talking about since the beginning, since part 1, about how ADHD has affected you in those stages of life. And if you could, this is a 2-part question. The first one is, for those that don't know, that maybe want to get into that career, that are watching that or have considered nursing, what is something, what is the schooling like for it, and what are the challenges there? And with ADHD, how did that present itself as a student?
Oh my gosh. So, for people that are going through the nursing process, of course, the scenario is different, like about 30 years ago as it is
Sure.
now. Unfortunately, with the current state of everything that's going on politically, and we won't get into it, nursing recently is no longer considered a profession. And unfortunately, with that being said, is that there's going to be problems with people finding federal funding for their nursing endeavors or going to nursing school. So, with the experience that I've had, weathering quite a few nursing shortages and the advantages and disadvantages of being in a nursing career, you have to take in consideration that there will be a nursing shortage here probably like in the next like about 5 years.
Sure.
And you probably know this as well as the general public, that nursing is probably the biggest workforce in a hospital setting or even like a caregiver setting in general. And there's just likely that's something that's going to happen here in the near future. But to answer your question, it depends on what kind of route you want to go into. If you want to go into a bachelor's degree, going right from high school to a bachelor's degree nursing program, it would take 4 years, probably like about five if you take into consideration the general ed courses that you probably have to take within like the first year or so, and then getting accepted into the nursing program in 4 years. The route that I took is that I was in college for probably the first semester over at UIC, and unfortunately, because of the ADHD, and I think I kind of blame it on the partying atmosphere and the freedom of being able to skip classes and go party while classes are still going, and not really having any firsthand vested interest into it fiscally. Obviously my parents were helping me out with like my tuition and everything. Flunked out of UIC after the first semester, so uh, I ended up going to Moraine Valley Community College, where I ended up eventually not only taking general ed courses, but then going into the nursing program over there. And whenever you go through like the associate's degree or like a general ed type of deal, it takes like about 2 years. Well, 1 year to, of course, get your general education courses at least under your belt in order to get accepted into your nursing program. And then from there, maybe, seeing if you could transfer over some credits over to a bachelor's degree or just keep on going with your associate's degree in nursing at that particular community college. In my case, Moraine Valley Community College. And that's where I ended up getting my associates. And while I was working over at University of Chicago, I was fortunate enough to working for an institution, an academic institution that was willing to pay for your advanced degree in your respective field, in this case, nursing, of course. So they did actually pay for my accelerated bachelor's degree into nursing, and that took away like the excuse that I didn't have any money to get my advanced degree. So I ended up getting my bachelor's from Lewis University, going in an accelerated bachelor's program, going to their satellite location over in Palos one Wednesday a week for like about 2 years, and I got my bachelor's degree from them as well.
And then going into the career, I like to ask a lot about expectations versus reality. Now, you mentioned having had family members that were also nurses, and it's a cultural thing as well. What were your expectations of it? How exposed were you to that life before you got into it? And then once you did get into it, did it meet your expectations, or was it much crazier, much easier, much harder? How would you describe that?
It's funny they asked that, because when we talk about like especially with my parents, when we talk about like the hardships of like trying to raise like a child under like not ideal like conditions, being kind of like a lower middle class at that time. Unfortunately, at that time, they had they couldn't like make ends meet with like a babysitter and stuff, and they really didn't have very good experiences with people taking care of me and stuff. So what they ended up doing is kind of like opting to take me to work. And rewind back to like my childhood and stuff. My mom started out before she got her lab tech certification and degree. She ended up she was actually like a caregiver over in a nursing home. And I prefaced like that stuff with like hardship with like parenthood and not having enough like money to like hire like a babysitter or anything. My mom ended up taking me to work with her over in the nursing home and stuff. And I think that's kind of like where a little bit of the seed was planted of me being a caregiver and everything, where I would be talking to the elderly, like ladies and men and stuff, and just have like a nice little kid to, old person like conversation, like me asking like a lot of questions and them being in a nursing home and extended care facility. Unfortunately, like they tend to be like a little bit lonely over there. So kind of like talking their ear off, as well as like not only getting information from them as like a toddler, but also like for them, being able to like have somebody that was there that was different, that was willing to talk to them and stuff, and that really took them out of their day-to-day routine at like the extended care facility or the nursing home and everything. I think from there, being able to like one of my first memories, unfortunately, or one of the first profound memories I've had when I was a child, was that unfortunately, you and I both know that accidents happen, right? So I actually, there was actually a patient that ended up falling, like trying to go to the bathroom and stuff, being in a nursing home and everything. And I remember running to the scene with everybody else just to see, as a curious child would, what's going on. I remember there was a whole bunch of blood everywhere, and of course, like the patient at the time, she, split her head open and was bleeding all over the place, because whenever you get some kind of laceration in your head, it looks worse than it actually is.
Right.
You start like bleeding profusely from like the head and whatever. And I remember the blood was all over the place. At the same time, looking back at that experience, it really didn't scare me as a child, which most people would probably think that, oh my gosh, if I saw something like that. I mean, it was something straight out of a horror movie. Like, there's an older patient that was like gashed in the head and there's blood all over the place. And I was actually kind of like enthralled by it, to where I think it kind of influenced one of my decisions to like be a nurse and stuff, and be able to treat people whenever they do get hurt.
Now, how old were you when that happened?
I say I was probably like about 3 or 4.
It's interesting you have such a clear memory of that at that age, because that's around that age, you talk. I mean, it is a big thing that
yeah, I was about to say it's probably like big profound memory, and it could work in both ways. It could either work in your favor. In my situation, I believe it did, or it could traumatize you.
Right. And so it's just surprising to me that as a kid you saw that, right? And when you recall it anyway, it's not something that scared you from it, rather it pulled you towards it. What if you can recall it, if you can think about what you felt, what was the feeling of, like, I wanted to help, or
there was I remember, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because when you were kind of like working up to the question, overwhelming empathy is kind of like what I recall seeing that situation. And yes, I did want to help, like as a kid, but I didn't know what to do. I just saw like a whole bunch of people like tending to her and saying, "Oh my God, what's he doing in here? Get him out!"
Yeah.
But obviously, I saw enough of it to where, I could tell you about it in like very, very detailed information. But yeah, I mean, like I think like the overwhelming empathy was a little bit of like sympathy, probably was another emotion I felt. And it was like, I want to be like, as a little kid, you think that you're invincible and that you could be a hero in any kind of situation using like your imagination and everything. And that's actually what I wanted to do, is I wanted to help her. I just didn't know what that looked like at that certain time.
Now, did you ever get to work in a nursing home as an adult?
No, I actually did not. But actually, one of the first clinical rotation that we did as nursing students, probably within the first semester or two of nursing school, I believe that they kind of like tailor made it to where the first experience of these nursing students of any kind of medical setting is to put them in a nursing home situation, because unfortunately you'll get to see people like at their worst and stuff. And believe it or not, it actually weeded out probably like about a good, I'd say probably like quarter of the class after or like during or immediately at, that rotation and stuff, because I think there they wanted to establish who was willing to be a caregiver, who was willing to be sacrificial, who was willing to be to see these patients at their worst and take care of them at their worst. Are you willing to take care of a demented patient that constantly like gets out of bed and like hurts himself? Are you willing to deal with people that unfortunately when they don't move around they get really contracted to where they're in a fetal position permanently, curled up in bed? Are you willing to see these people as unfortunately they get these bed sores or their ailments get worse? And for me, of course, that was like a resounding yes, and I actually went down the rabbit hole of finishing nursing school. But as we'll touch on later on, I can tell you like how the hindsight's always 2020, and while we're talking, the hardships I had, like having ADHD, like being in nursing school.
Well, when we talk a lot about here about like lessons and things that you learned about yourself within the career. And so when we think about like, I guess if you were to think about what it taught you about yourself, that career, once you got into it, what are some of the bigger lessons that stand out to you just off the top of your head?
Bigger lessons are that you have to have like genuine love and care for one another. I think just in general, not to be like on a soapbox or anything, I think just if people genuinely cared and wanted to commune with each other and take care of one another, I think the world would be a better place. But what was your question again? Sorry.
Yeah, like what you think you got out of it, like what did it teach you about yourself?
What it tell me about myself is that I'm a very, very good caregiver. That I am very empathetic to people that are at their worst. I'm always wanting to help. I know that I'm a helper. I know that I genuinely care about people, and I learned that I'm I'm a good person, that I'm good at caring for people, and that I'm good at being a nurse, and that I'm good at like being able to figure out like a lot of like medical things, as well as try to use like a lot of critical thinking in order to help a patient that probably like died out in the field like a couple days ago back to health and see them through.
When we talk about like in this field, I mean, I'm sure you have like endless stories about some of the craziest things you've seen, some of the scariest. So if I could ask you about that, what are some of the scarier things you saw, and how did you deal with those?
Let's see, scary or like profound?
Let's do both. Yeah, whichever one comes to mind.
Let's see. There's so many stories. Not some like one of the scariest situations that I've been in, and it's actually not a very, very long story, is that like usually like when you're working at a high acuity ICU such as University of Chicago, we're also taking care of patients probably within the tri-state area that other community hospitals or other major hospitals for that matter think that they don't have the resources or can't take care of this patient. We'll probably end up taking them on. So at University of Chicago, I ended up taking care of like a lot of sick patients. And one of the situations is that probably like once every week or two, because these people are so sick, they'll end up coding. And when I say coding, we're talking cold blue, doing CPR on them, cracking open the chest, going back to the OR to try to take care of like whatever situation's going on. Maybe there's like an anastomosis site that like started leaking. Anyway, a myriad of code situations, but in this particular situation, the scary part, but actually kind of like exciting, was that we actually coded a patient, two patients at the same time, and that's happened on like more than one occasion. Yeah, so those are scary situations.
When stuff like that happens, it has to tug at your curiosity about life and death. Did that happen to
Mhm.
you at all while you were in that
Oh
career?
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like, like I know myself and hardships that I've been through and through the counseling that I've gotten. I realize that my sense of humor is kind of like a self-defense mechanism.
Mm.
And I really have to be careful with my ADHD as well as it being a defense mechanism that I don't lay it on too thick. But as a nurse, in order to get through the daily grind, the daily day to day, and the daily giving up yourself emotionally and mentally, as being a caregiver and stuff, you develop kind of like a dark sense of humor in order to like cope and stuff.
Sure.
To where you kind of like laugh at the little things, or you watch like old like shows like the original Scrubs and everything, where they try to put like a little bit of like a funny spin to it and stuff. And the thing is that like yeah, you kind of have to separate life and death. I've always been a very big supporter of you leave work at work and home stuff at home stuff.
Mm.
So unfortunately, whenever you go through the stress or traumatic experience of not saving a life in emergency situations, um, first of all, you're kind of like programmed to go back and kind of like debrief yourself and say, did I really do as much as I could? Could I have done this, that, and whatever different? So there's like a little bit of like a regret situation that kind of goes on, or a doubting, playing the situation back in your mind, saying, could I have done something different to change the outcome, which ultimately you want it to be the patient still alive, right?
Right.
And uh, yeah, you do start to question life and death. One thing that you realize that everything that we have, one thing that we have in common with every living thing on this earth is life and death. Really. If you include like plants, animals, humans, that's one thing that we really have in common with everything that has some kind of like living carbon in them. And yeah, it really makes you like question like your existence. I know some people that through some emergency situations that they've actually become atheists over it,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
believing in God, because sometimes when you see people at their worst, um, from their standpoint, and from when I've talked to a couple of people that have gone through traumatic experiences or emergency situations that have changed them, they say to themselves, like, if there is a God, how can you let this kind of like suffering happen?
Mhm.
You know? And that's like of course like a whole different like conversation, a whole episode, a whole series, what
Sure.
have you. But yeah, I mean we could definitely go down the rabbit hole on that whole theological um thing. But I've realized like it's kind of like twofold. Not only does it really remind me of my own mortality, and knowing that Father Time it really drives home that Father Time's undefeated. That no matter what, you're gonna die. And the older I'm getting, and we're getting a little bit more philosophical here, I just realized that time is a commodity that we can never get back. And I try to do whatever I can to try to make my time more efficient, not only for myself, but also for family and things that I do enjoy doing. Because, yeah, I mean, like, uh, time that you give to like other people, you can't get back. Time that you give to like, sitting around and like watching TV, you can't get back. And you realize as like you're watching like a lot of death, maybe like because like for the unfortunately like the majority of people don't experience death unless it's a pet or like a close family member. Whereas a nurse, it happens more often than they probably want to admit, and definitely more often than they than they could count. I can tell you how many people have died while like me giving them like chest compressions and stuff. And we could talk about like the good triumph stuff, like being a nurse as well. But unfortunately, that's like the dark things that you have to deal with. Actually, one of the most profound situations that I've actually come in contact with as a CVICU nurse or just a nurse in general. So over at University of Chicago, we did a lot of heart transplants, multi-organ transplants, and I had a 19-year-old kid that I was taking care of, and unfortunately, he had some kind of congenital defect with his heart to where he needed heart transplant, and he and I kind of bonded a little bit because I was still younger. I mean, I was probably like about 27, 28,
Right.
and really, really related to this kid a lot because he's sitting there talking about sports, talking about like, playing video games, talking about playing with his friends. And he's a bigger kid too. I mean, he wasn't, even though he was only 19 years old, he was probably like about at least like about 250 pounds, like 6'3", 250 pounds. So he wasn't small whatsoever. And then like I took care of him prior to the heart transplant, and then I took care of him after the heart transplant, and everything was like going well to the point of like where he went home. So I made the transition from cardiac surgery to electrophysiology, which has to do with like the electric conduction of the hearts. Okay, heart rhythm disorders, defibrillators, pacemakers, so forth. So fast forward to me going into electrophysiology. One of the doctors was nice enough to offer to take us to a cadaver lab during work hours when it was slow, and kind of like check out the cadavers, and especially in particular a pork or a pig like heart, because anatomically, aside from the size, a pork or a pig heart is actually most like a human heart. So
Right.
we did some dissecting so that we could see how the structures like correlate with one another and everything. So I was like, for whatever reason, like of course it was like a cadaver lab and everything, and this is actually where they do like that's necessarily biopsies, but like basically like getting bodies like prepared for like going to like funerals and stuff. They have to take all the organs out and everything. A coroner, that's what it was,
Right.
a coroner. So there was this patient that he had like on the table, like in the distance, and of course it's all open and everything. So while we were doing the dissection, I kept on like looking over and stuff, yeah, over at this corner doing like weighing like all these organs and everything. And I asked doctor, I'm like, since there's nothing else going on, can I go see like what's going on with that cadaver over there and stuff? She's like, yeah, go ahead, take your time. So take as much time as you want. We don't have anything going on. So I went over to that corner and stuff, started talking to him and asking him about like little nuances of like about the patient. And he's like, yeah, this guy was post heart transplant, went into rejection, and he ended up like dying and everything. And I'm like, wait a second, how old is this kid? What's his name? He's like, well, I can't give you a name. I can tell you he's like 19 years old. And I look at the patient. It was that patient that I was taking care of like a couple months back. Yeah, a couple months back, talking to him about like playing the video games and what he's going to do after like his heart surgery, heart transplant, after getting his heart replaced, what he's going to do, what his aspirations are, what his dreams are as like a 19-year-old kid. And there he was on that coroner's table and stuff with his organs being extracted and like weighed and everything for like record keeping and stuff. It was very, very somber, and it was very, very chilling to see somebody that's had so many dreams and aspirations and that you were able to talk on the level with. They're not here with us anymore. He'll never see those dreams or those aspirations or those conversations to fruition.
And another thing, another factor of it all of all of that is that, in some sense, maybe you didn't know him, how his family members knew him, but you get a sense of a person when you have contact like that, when you have a conversation about dreams and what they like, and especially when you're taking care of them, because when you're taking care of them, there's some level of vulnerability that they're giving you,
100%.
right? And so, yeah, man, what do you think out of that, right? Like, and there has to be some level of appreciation too, of like, man, like it really can at any moment just be done, right? Like that kind of
Yeah.
brings that reality and appreciation for the stuff that you have. No.
Yeah, no, 100%. It really, maybe come home and like, hug and kiss my daughter and stuff,
Mm.
and, I'll let her know under your breath that, I'll do whatever I can to like, take care of you and make sure like nothing happens to you and stuff. But unfortunately, as you know, there's a lot of things in life that's out of our control.
That's right.
And it's not necessarily like what happens to you, but what do you do when it happens?
That's right.
Right? That kind of reality kind of sets in to where, yeah, unfortunately, death is going to happen. Unfortunately, my parents are going to pass away. Unfortunately, my dog's going to pass away. My wife's going to pass away. And, it just really, really has you think about like, okay, what do I need to do in order to look back in my life and say I'm satisfied? What am I going to do to kind of like cement my legacy to where my family will appreciate what I did, down the road, or to where like people will remember what I've done like down the road? What is going to be like my legacy after like I leave this earth? And of course, it's going to be different for every person and stuff. But you asked the question, and here we are.
Yeah, that's that. By the way, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That is something that I'm sure is difficult to think about, even all these years later. And so I really appreciate you sharing. We talked a lot about, like some of the challenges, but what are some of the triumphs, as we mentioned earlier, that you can think of off the top of your head, where you said, man, like that didn't look like it was gonna, that was gonna be, that was gonna end well, and yet we prevailed despite all those odds. I'm sure there's been countless of those.
Yeah, definitely countless of those, but the one that really jumps out at me is that fast forward to my career over the place that I'm working at now. They have interventional cardiology recovery area
Right.
that we share with cath lab, share with a couple other departments such as cath lab and interventional radiology. And there's a patient that started coding, to where one of the nurses kind of like runs in the room. Oh my God, he's coding. So like people are just kind of like standing around. I run into the room and I start like, CVICU, like experience kind of kicks in. Who's the doctor? Blah, blah, blah. All right, go ahead and page him. I'm going to start chest compressions, call respiratory. Let's see if we can start tubing him and everything. And unfortunately, whenever you do chest compressions, we are taught as nurses and life supporters, basic life support, that we have to compress the human chest at least like 2.5 or 2 inches, right? So unfortunately, what they don't tell you when you're doing chest compressions is that 9 times out of 10 you're going to break ribs.
Right.
Okay. So I'm sitting there like doing chest compressions on the guy, and of course you could hear the crunching and crackling as I'm doing like the chest compressions and everything, and you actually feel like underneath your palm as it's happening. That literally is his chest was like caving in while I was doing chest compressions on him. But after all of code team like got there and everything, I left. I'm all like, I did whatever I needed to do. Like I'm gonna go back to my department because it wasn't my patient, and we had to keep the day moving and such. So a couple days later, I was taking care of like a patient, and I noticed that he had these lidocaine patches like on his chest and everything. And usually whenever that happens, it's usually people that are really that have like any back issues or anything, or if there's a sternotomy that looks like that. Some people, everybody has like a different like pain tolerance and stuff. It's basically there to kind of like numb the pain and stuff. And usually it's there for like people with like open heart surgery because they're having so much like incisional pain like up and down their chest. And I noticed that this guy didn't have any chest incisions and stuff, And then I'm all like, yeah, Mr. So-and-so. I'm like, what's been going on with like your chest and everything? Now, mind you, he's having like a defibrillator like placed with us and everything, because of so he's like, I guess I died after that last procedure, and they nursed me back to life. And my my friend that was in the room, she's like, that was the one that you were doing chest compressions on in cardiac recovery. That's a guy that and he obviously had those lidocaine patches on his chest because I'd broken a couple of ribs. I'd broken like his chest and everything. And he looks at me with like, he like does like the slow head turn, looks at me with like tears streaming down his eyes, and he's like, thank you for saving my life.
What a,
Yeah.
How does that feel to hear somebody say that?
Oh, you feel like overjoyed. Like you feel like even now, like I got the chills just even talking about that story again. And it makes you really, really, it drives home that you found your purpose, or at least one of the purposes in your life. I'm a firm believer that everybody on this earth has multiple purposes, and whether they find them or not, but sometimes they just happen. And that was when I knew that, like, the calling that I was brought to and being a nurse, that's what I was made to be. And this is firsthand where it made a difference in somebody's life, and literally a life and death, like, difference in somebody's life. It was gratifying on one hand. At the same time, it's all like, I did whatever a seasoned nurse or whatever, like another person like would do and stuff, in an emergency situation, especially like having the knowledge that I had. Because come to find out, a lot of the nurses at that time that were on staff they were younger nurses, and they had never been in an emergency situation like that. So they all froze up to where I had to actually kind of like push some of them aside and really start directing them and where to go, because I've been in those situations countless times to where not only have those nurses never been in a code situation, but they've never had anybody code on them. So it was really, really new in terms of the experience that these nurses were getting firsthand in terms of like a life-saving situation. But that's why we become a nurse, right? In order to make differences in people's lives. And of course, we're talking about the extreme where we're literally saving somebody's life, but there was a lot of like immediate gratification there, and that was really a blessing, not only to him but also to me, because it's all like, thank you, Lord, that I've saved this person's life, and that you trusted me in order to work through my hands in order to bring this person back to life and enjoy many more years with their family or what have you.
Now, since we're on that topic, selfishly, I want to know what, has anybody, and you don't have to tell me if this isn't something you want to share, but has anybody ever shared with you, given that you've dealt with so many like issues or situations where code blue was a thing that was a reality that you had to face, right? It was a possibility in your day-to-day. What have you had anybody share with you near-death experiences? And if they did, what did they tell you?
Yeah, actually I have, because again, being in the CVICU at University of Chicago, there were some people that unfortunately had just some idiopathic cardiac arrest out in the field, or just basically dropping dead in public.
Right.
And we get those patients, and of course prepping for like cardiac surgery or what have you, and they're stabilized and everything. And there's probably like about a handful of people that were at a good state of mind to where they had near death experience. And a lot of them, I'd say probably about a good 3 of them, had kind of like the same story, where they would see like a flash of light. They would see, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but
Right.
I've heard this from like patients personally as well, where they actually see like loved ones that have passed away, and they like either hug them or shake their hands, or have like this very, very euphoric feeling of peace. And next thing you know, there's like a big flash of light again, and they're like in reality and stuff. Or another person could say that same deal, they would see like a whole bunch of loved ones. There's like a overwhelming feeling of peace, of joy, and then one of them heard a voice saying it's not your time yet, and the next thing you know, they're like back in like reality. But those are the two experiences that I'm kind of comparing right now. Yeah, those are people that like obviously like didn't know each other, and it was like years in between of where they were taken care of like by me and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like spooky, like to share like those kinds of experiences and stuff. But it does give some kind of like affirmation to me personally that there is some kind of like life beyond death, and it's not experience. It's not an accident that two different people from two different situations, two different walks of life, two different lives have the same type of experiences that they described. A lot of like similarities between experiences that they felt.
And you mentioned earlier, and if you've already talked about it, let me know and we'll move on. But you mentioned earlier that there were some things that you, looking back in hindsight, that maybe you would have done differently, or regrets that you had about that career in terms of like your decisions. Maybe, I don't know, you chose a certain path and maybe I would have done it differently this way. When you say that, what are you referring to? And if we haven't already talked about it, what is that about?
Well, I mean, that comes from like having like ADHD and stuff, and unfortunately, like with ADHD, you let things get out of control. In the last episode, we're talking about like in a more lighthearted topic about like how we have like organized piles of everything, right?
That's right.
So kind of like the reason why like I bring that up and stuff is because you see like the hardships of like having like ADHD, and kind of like how I think what that drives home is that you really have trouble making like boundaries with like your time and like your emotions. And that being said, the reason why I said that statement is because looking back at like my nursing career and my life with like ADHD, unfortunately, I really didn't put any kind of like boundaries on taking care of people emotionally, mentally, physically, to where it actually took a toll on me. Like I said earlier, I really mean it when I say I want to leave work at work and like home stuff at home stuff. But that's when I know that I am getting stressed out, or when it's taking an emotional and mental toll on me, is when my work ends up coming home. And unfortunately, I've heard from like a phrase from like counseling: hurt people hurt people.
That's right.
And unfortunately, if we don't have as nurses a very healthy outlet via talking, via counseling, via what have you, working out, it comes out in very inopportune ways, and it comes out in very destructive ways, to where you hear about some nurses getting into drug abuse, getting into alcohol abuse, and still being able to function. But obviously they develop a problem because these experiences that they've had throughout their nursing career does take a toll on you. And of course, whenever things are traumatic enough, our minds have a very big knack for suppressing these memories and stuff, to where they manifest in other ways, and again in opportune times. So that's what I kind of mean when I was talking about getting into nursing and everything like that. I really didn't know or take into consideration, and I'm sure people that wanted me to go down that path could say too, is that you really don't take that factor into consideration about like how much of like a mental, physical, and emotional toll it takes on you after a while. And unfortunately, it goes back to ADHD. We have troubles like setting boundaries and stuff.
The thing. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
That's such an important thing that you just said, because even as you say it, it's like, oh yeah, as in I didn't even think about. Like, it's obvious once you say it, but you really
The
don't.
awareness wasn't there at the time.
Right.
Put it that way.
Yeah, and so like you don't think about like, yeah, they're human beings too, and that's one of the things that even with therapists, right? Like they're the professionals at this thing, and so you don't almost think about like, no, they must have it down pat, right? Like they must have it figured out. And it's funny, I've had a conversation with a therapist about this, where it's like I'm also fairly I barely know what's going on. Like we just know how to handle certain things, but that doesn't mean that we're not like we're also vulnerable to
Oh yeah.
the tragedies of life. We're also vulnerable to mental health.
And that
Yeah, there you go.
that doesn't necessarily mean that you're inept in handling your own situation. It
Right.
just means that you're not equipped, or your brain or mind tells you that you're not equipped at this certain point in time to deal with this certain situation. So guess what? We're going to suppress it by putting it in the shelf, putting it behind the door, locked away a little bit. And when we go through the proper channels in order to deal with those situations, then we could go ahead and unlock that door and deal with it. But knowing from personal experience and through counseling and suppressing like a lot of like my childhood, as well as like bad situations that happened to me, it's not fun going through it, because again, your mind like has a very weird way of self-preserving and protecting itself, that unfortunately, like and you probably hear about it through like trauma counselings as well,
Right.
that you deal with not only the feelings mentally and emotionally of the situation, but sometimes like it manifests physically too. You know?
Right.
It-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really weird when it comes to PTSD and any kind of like traumatic experiences. And of course, let me preface this by saying that I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. I haven't been trained in anything psychology wise, but knowing what I know about my ADHD and how it plays into my daily life, as well as my past experiences and stuff, you get to go back and check off a box and say, okay, ADHD was involved in this situation, or ADHD was involved in that situation. How did I deal with it? And how did it, and if you go into the weeds about it, you get to question yourself and say, okay, how did ADHD either detriment or help myself, or help the situation, you know?
And I think another thing to bring up, we have enough time, I think, for an important question that I think is worth asking about this. When you look back at it, right, like if you had advice for your younger self just getting into this career, what would you say to him?
I would say to make your decision very carefully. I would say to set boundaries, be aware of how you feel about certain situations, be aware of um, if being a caregiver is detrimenting you as a person. Because I think that, being a nurse and going through like the things that I've been through, unfortunately, I did have like a drug problem. Unfortunately, I did have like an alcohol problem. And I would tell my younger self, to be aware of how you feel. And if you feel like you need help, get help, regardless of what other people says, regardless of whatever stigma is out there, to kind of like divert your way into getting some kind of self-help. Obviously back then, mental illness does not have the notoriety that it does today. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this podcast, right?
Right.
So, I really appreciate you bringing this to the forefront and stuff, because, a lot of generalities are made through like any kind of like professional information that's out there, such as through social media, through like a doctor that's being interviewed on a Today Show, or Dr. Phil or whatever and stuff. Yeah, that's stuff that is all great and fine and everything, but being able to get some kind of counseling or some kind of advice from people that are not only actively going through it, but have been through it before, I think is priceless. Because as you and I both know, there is no one size fits all, but there are similarities to our situations and similarities to the certain nuances that you're probably covering in your podcast, and mental illnesses and behavior problems that you're covering in your podcast, to where people could maybe take that little grain of salt of hope and of how somebody dealt with the situation and adhere it to their own situation. A lot of times there's going to be like a lot of like comparing apples and oranges, but I encourage I would encourage myself, my younger self, to get help when you can, and know that there are some things that will bother you and that you just have to deal with then and there, rather than suppress it and deal with it later in opportune times.
Yeah, for those that are curious to learn more about Joel's story, this is only part 2, and so there's definitely more to talk about. Particularly, the your hat alludes to what our next conversation will include, which is the business that you have with the drones, and so I'm very excited about that next part. So anybody that's watching, stay tuned. There's a part 3 incoming, and Joel, thank you again for not only making time for this conversation, but also for sharing what you've shared with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Appreciate the time, Josh, and thank you for bringing this up in the forefront. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And then I'm just going to cut here, and then let me just stop recording.